Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, brought to you by Music Ally, the show that's fascinated by all the fun and games and finances of the music world, as explained each week by me, Steve Lamack, and him, Stuart Dredge. If you want an easy guide to what's going on in the music biz and how it all works, and one or two revealing stats along the way, then here we are. This week, as promised, we will be spending a bit of time on one of our listeners' questions, which it begs the question whether, against the sometimes overriding narrative, whether some artists are actually much better off in the streaming era than they would have been in the heyday of vinyl and CD sales. We'll also be asking how much it would cost to buy a bit of the Smiths. But first, as always, we'll start with a big figure. Well, a big figure and a much smaller but still significant stat, both of which are to be found in a new report published last week. The big figure, and I'm not going to inject any fake suspense here because Stuart already knows this one. I'll just tell you, the big figure is £6.68 billion, which is the total consumer spend on live music across the UK in 2024. This, according to the annual report from Live, which is, of course, the live music industry trade body, £6.68 billion, which is, it's a new record for spending on live music, and it's been helped along the way by the pop music market. There's a breakdown of genres, and of all the genres of music, pop music was the biggest hitter in 2024, driven by the likes of, Taylor Swift, obviously, but also Charlie XCX and Dua Lipa. So pop music accounted for 32.1% of the live spend total. That's the big figure. The smaller one, and we actually alluded to this in one of our Patreon-only pilots, which we did a little while ago, but the smaller number is 137, which is, I can ask you this one, Stuart, 137 refers to?
1 gig being held every 137 seconds in the UK last year.
Yeah, 1 gig every 137 seconds.
I mean, you must have gone to most of them, yeah?
Yeah. Not even I'm that prolific. But yeah, what a year. I mean, the report in general, I mean, the top line, obviously, much like last year, is the appetite for live music, especially at stadium and arena level, is, it's more healthy than ever. I mean, certainly the turnover is up, but set against this, if you dig into the report, it does also go on to reiterate that, these are still very challenging times for the grassroots live music scene, for venues and promoters, artists at that level, and independent festivals as well, obviously for all the reasons which we have touched on previously on this show. Just one other thing for now, in terms of geographical spread, London is still the leading city for live music spend. I think it's down. I think it's lost some of its percentage lead though. But London's still the major place for live music, followed by the rest of the top five. Manchester, Glasgow, Birmingham, and Cardiff are the top 5 places where people spend money on live music, and that's your numbers for this week. We picked just one news story this week before we go to any other business, because we couldn't not mention this. Morrissey is, you may have seen this story, Morrissey is putting his business interests in the Smiths up for sale. So what's actually on offer, and how much is a piece of the Smiths worth? Morrissey's piece of the Smiths. What do we think that will eventually fetch?
Yeah, well, I suppose to say what happened, in case anyone hasn't followed this, it was a blog post, wasn't it, on his website? I think he's got this section, messages from Morrissey. So from the horse's mouth, not that he would thank me for that. And yeah, he said, Morrissey has no choice but to offer for sale all of his business interests in the Smiths. And it listed them. So it's the name, all the artwork, which obviously he created, merchandising rights, songs, synchronization rights, recordings, and contractual rights. So basically what he's saying is he's going to sell all his share, because obviously Johnny Marr has his share of the Smiths and all the songs and recordings. But yeah, and he's basically saying to any interested bidders, and at the end of this blog post, there's a Gmail address to contact. Any serious investors should make contact. And a lot of the coverage of this announcement was pointing out that it's not the most serious way to sell a catalogue, is to say, email this Gmail address.
Yeah.
But that's happened. And there's some stuff in there about how he's burnt out by his connections to the rest of the band. I've had enough of malicious associations. It's a little bit teenagery, dare I say.
And I guess this all comes as a package. I imagine. Do you have to buy the whole job lot? Would you?
It sounds like it. Yeah, he wants to sell them all to thing. I mean, in theory, maybe you could go in and say, "I want one big, make an offer." But yeah, so it made it made us both think, didn't it? How much might he get? Because we've spent the last year and a half covering these news stories about Queen, Pink Floyd, David Bowie, like how much those big rock catalogs are worth. So I've been thinking about it and digging into it, and it's really fascinating. Like the things you do when you try and estimate the value of a music catalog, it's quite a set formula in a way, or a set process. So you look at past performance, you look at how many sales, how many streams, what kind of radio play, you look at the money it's been making until now. But you also model forward, you model its future performance. And that's something that streaming has had quite a big impact on, because you can model streaming. Like, unless you do something so terrible that you get immediately cancelled by everyone, streaming is quite stable. Like if you're doing, I don't know, 500 million streams a year now, you'll probably do that next year. It might go up a bit. It's not going to suddenly drop off a cliff. So you can look forward and say, right, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, this is how many streams it will get, how much money it will make.
Yeah.
So you do that. You compare it. So you sort of say, what did Queen do their catalogue for? What did Stewart sell his for? You try and look for comparable bands or comparable artists and say, right, what did they go for? Because then you can go out and say, well, we want that kind of multiples of work. We want that kind of, that much times how much money we're making. And look, this very similar thing sold for this much. So we're asking for this. And then you look at things like, can you do more with it? So look at an artist's catalogue and go, is it being underexploited? Are they not getting any good sync deals in TV ads or films? Or is it not being promoted on streaming services well? Do you think you can do more with it? So that's the kind of the unrealized potential. And then you look at other factors or problems or barriers, which with the Smiths, there's one obvious one, which is that Ma and Morrissey don't get on at all. And so a lot of these things about, well, what more could we do with the catalogue? Until now, you've been like, well, do we need to get both of them to agree? In which case, it's a problem. So you look at all these things, and that's how you kind of come to some kind of figure. So I was looking at stats. I mean, it's a bit hard to get, but the band sold somewhere between 4 and 5 million albums in their career. I think there have been a couple of sources saying that. They've got nearly 21 million monthly listens on Spotify, which was I was quite surprised at that. Like that's a big total. Not that, not because I don't like the Smiths, but as we discussed last week, but that's kind of, that's a decent amount for a band of that ilk. And like with a back of the napkin maths, maybe their catalogue's making somewhere between $5 million and $10 million a year now, perhaps. And then maybe you look at the multiple. Okay, so what times that is the value of it? If you got 10 times that, it might be worth between $50 million and $100 million. If you got 15 times that, it's 75 million times 50 million. But that's the whole catalogue, not just Morrissey's share.
Yeah.
So you're looking at his share. So, I mean, I was looking at some of the figures for like Queen, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, the big hitters. It basically boils down to, I don't know, if you're Morrissey, you might be able to get like $20 million, even $30 million for your share of the Smiths. And that is, we're not even talking about the other stuff, the naming rights, the artwork, the merchandise. So it's tens of millions of dollars that he could get in a sale. The other thing is unpredictables. And I was thinking, actually, I was watching the Radio 2 concert at the weekend. They had the big concert in Chelmsford. And Sophie Ellis-Bextor was playing. And she was doing Murder on the Dance Floor, to a whole crowd singing along. And I suddenly thought, if she'd been selling her catalogue in the summer of 2023, it would have had a certain value based on the stream of that. But then that November, Saltburn came out and Murder on the Dance Floor went viral. And her career, her streams have stepped up a notch. And if she was selling a catalogue now, it would be worth a lot more. And no one would have predicted that. So that's the other thing, is something could happen with the Smiths. They could be, I don't know, you basically need a film with someone dancing around naked in the closing scene. and profit ensues. And then the problems. Like, I think the other thing that can happen is a band who aren't together can reunite. So Oasis is the obvious example. Their streams went up a lot when they reunited. There's a big spike in that. And that's made their catalogue more valuable. Are the Smiths going to reunite? I mean, we could probably I don't know. Let's make a face on whether we think we're going to reunite ever.
If anything, surely this is the final nail in the coffin, isn't it? In the relationship between Morrissey and Ma. Let me, don't you remember? I mean, this was around the time we first started this podcast. Wasn't there a massive falling out between Hall and Oates when one of them sold part of their share of Hall and Oates? Because all of a sudden, when this goes through, now we've got no idea who's going to buy Morrissey's share of the Smiths, but whoever it is, and it might be a record label, it could be a hedge fund, couldn't it? And so Johnny Marr will own half the Smiths, and somebody unrelated to the Smiths will own the other half of the Smiths, which I think is quite uncomfortable for some musicians.
Although, if you're Johnny Marr, maybe it's more comfortable than Morrissey owning the other half. Because, I mean, it's the thing, like everything you want to do with a catalogue now, apart from people just listen to it regularly, you need the people who own it to agree. And it's, I mean, do you remember we covered that story, I think, when Morrissey said that Johnny Marr was going to tour without him with someone else, and he registered the trademarks. And I think Marr came out and said, no, I did that because people were abusing them. And I tried to get in touch with Morrissey to say, let's sort this out. And he didn't reply. So that gave you an example of how hard it's been for them to work together. So in a way, this could. The other thing I was thinking was, and I don't know if Johnny Marr has any interest in doing this, but Johnny Marr could go to some investors and say, "Look, will you help me raise the cash to buy Morrissey out?" Yeah. If Morrissey would sell to Marr, and bring it all under one person who is the co-founder of the Smiths. So in a way, that might be the most positive outcome of this. If Johnny Marr was somehow able to own it all. Yeah. And then he can do stuff and he can kind of keep the legacy going and not have to worry about some hedge fund coming in with ideas. So there's been no report of him saying he's going to do that, but it certainly feels like in the same way that Taylor Swift bought back her master recordings, artists can be the bidders. It doesn't have to just be investors. But I mean, I want to come back to the kind of the way it was presented, because if you want to sell your catalogue, you get some advisors in who know their onions. And you get them to shop it around, and you get them to start bidding more. Ideally, you want a couple of people competing to drive the price up. Putting a blog post out saying "I am so sad," here's a Gmail address. That's not the traditional way of selling a catalogue, and so that is the question I think investors might be asking themselves: is that how serious is he about this? Is this something I should spend time and diligence on investigating? But could be tens of millions of dollars, and I would love to see it end up in the hands of Johnny Marr or his partners, so that it's so that legacy carries on, rather than, like you say, it could be anyone owning it, and then you have worries.
Yeah, okay, that's the price of the Smiths. Right, we will have obviously more news next week. We'll have lots of it, I suspect, by then. But for the rest of this episode, as promised a few weeks ago, now we had an inquiry come in from listener Simon Hemmelrick, which we thought was worth a chunk of time, because it is an interesting point which we wanted to analyse properly. And it was this, Simon's observation. Thank you, Simon, for your email, which said, "Hi there, I love the pod. Thank you very much. I listen to it in the gym, as it's much more interesting than high energy house music."
Right, stop right there. Let's discuss this for 10 minutes, because I think this is a good endorsement.
Yeah, we are. We're much more interesting on a treadmill than high energy house music. Running to try and get away from us. I have a question, says Simon, that I hope you can help me with. Artists claim that music doesn't pay as well as it used to because of streaming. But for many artists, surely the opposite is true. Bonnie Tyler, for instance, has 15 million listens per month on Spotify, and I guess that means about 60 million, say, across all streaming platforms. If she gets £800 per million plays, that's £48,000 a month. To get that amount from actual album sales, she would have had to have sold she'd have to sell 50,000 albums a month, or 600,000 a year. Now, there's no way, says Simon, that Bonnie would be selling that many copies in 2025, whether streaming existed or not. Her career peaked 45 years ago, he adds. Similarly, Mazzy Star, the band Mazzy Star, have 12 million monthly Spotify listens. That must be earning them more in a year than they ever got from their albums, which barely made the top 40 in the mid-90s. So, he concludes, is it not the case that some artists are earning a far better living from their music because of streaming? Stuart, where would you like to start? Because there's quite a lot to this and varying opinions, which I think you've been canvassing.
That's it, yeah. So basically, I pulled a leaf out of your book and talked to my secret sources. So one of whom knows a lot about the artist side of streaming and label contracts, and then one from the label side who knows about it from that point of view. So, and they're both journalists. They both gave me quite full responses to Simon's question. I guess the short answer is yes. Like, some artists are doing much better thanks to streaming. And part of that is because, you get paid when people listen to your music now, not just when they buy it. So in the old times, you would make a lot of money from sales of your CD album when it came out, and then they drop off because everyone had it. So that's the change, and it's correct. And both my sources agree with that, saying yes, some people are doing better. But then you get into the real nub of this question, which is what you get paid. And what you get paid depends on your deals with your label, with your publisher. And that's where none of us know what Bonnie Tyler's deal is. None of us know what Mazzy Star's deal is. So it's all speculation from the outside unless they talk about it. But both my sources actually, they politely took issue with some of Simon's calculations. And I think to go back to it, this idea of Bonnie Tyler getting £800 per million streams, they both had a disagreed with that. So what they said was, the label source said, this is based on the artist getting a modern digital master royalty rate of 25%, roughly. So getting 25% of all the streaming revenue, and being the songwriter, and then for all the money to flow through accurately and fully, and there being no unrecouped balances or other costs to be deducted. And they added, what could possibly go wrong? So, and then my artist contact said the same thing. Said Simon is assuming Bonnie is getting around 24% on her deal, 24% of the streaming royalties. And they said, as her deal was signed in the late 1970s, at the point of signing, it was probably closer to 5%.
Right.
And whether or not it's gotten higher now is down to how her career has been managed. And that is something both said. This idea of a deal with an artist from that era would have been much lower than 24% royalties. And they may have renegotiated it since, but that depends on a whole range of factors. And actually, my label contact said the same thing. A lot of artists in the 70s and 80s were on single-digit royalty deals.
Right.
So you would get less than 10%. So, and then we've got this whole area of recoupment, of depending how much advances your label paid you, whether you've paid them back, you might not be seeing any money from streaming. So that's the thing. That's where we don't know what either they're making in this case. But this holds out the thought that some artists are still on those deals with single-digit royalties and are maybe not recouped and are doing terribly from streaming. And some artists have renegotiated. They're on good modern royalty rates and they're doing well because their music's got. And then my label contact summarised it saying, look, there are artists who make a better living from streaming than from sales back in the day. Here's the caveat. If they're continually played, so if people are playing the music, if they have good partners paying fully and accurately under decent deal terms. And that's what it comes down to. And then my artist contact added that catalogs generates the vast amount of income in streaming, but whether or not artists benefit is always the question. So again, separating this idea of lots of money being paid out with whether that's going through to those artists. That's interesting. Just before we move on to the next part of the answer, that means it sort of adds weight to the fact that any artist who's renegotiated their deal and is on a better percentage now, that surely means that back in the day, that undermines the argument as well. Well, it doesn't undermine it. It actually enforces Simon's argument that, they're making more money now, because if they were only on, 8%, 9% royalty, even if they were selling millions of albums, they weren't getting as much money as I'd imagined, because that single figure royalty rate, which you say from the 70s and 80s, that means they weren't possibly making the money that I thought some of the big artists may have been making. Well, that's it. And it depends, obviously some artists were selling huge amounts of albums in the 70s and 80s. It's weird me talking about Bonnie Tyler, because when I was a kid, my dad he had the Bonnie and Meatloaf album. I don't know if that ever came onto your CD player.
Never on my radar. Never.
But like he played that a lot in the car, and a lot of people a lot of dads bought that album. You know, that era of it was that peak CD. It was Dire Straits, Meatloaf. They were selling so much. But also, I mean, the other thing that my artist source pointed out was radio is a factor in this. So someone like Bonnie Tyler was huge on commercial radio in her heyday. But she's still, there's all these classic radio and these hit stations now that she still played a lot. And where that gets complicated is, okay, how much were they making from radio back in the day? How much are they making now? And if streaming is taking over from radio, which is a whole other show to discuss.
Yeah.
But as streaming gets bigger, if radio gets smaller, the way you get paid for those two things is different. We talked about this before. An artist gets a bigger share of their radio royalties than they do of the streaming royalties. So if you're an artist who was big on radio, the rise of streaming may be good for you in terms of your royalties from that, but it may also be cannibalizing some of your radio royalties, and that has to be factored in.
Okay.
And yeah, the other thing I had actually, my label contact had some feedback on Simon's Mazzy Star question, because he pointed out actually, he was saying, well, they only barely cracked the top 40, but in the US in the 1990s, barely cracking the top 40 was a few million album sales.
Right.
Least,
Right.
So some of the bands that didn't have big chart positions still did sell millions of albums back then. I was thinking I should ask my boss Paul about this, because he was in the Sundays, and I think of them as a similar band to Mazzy Star in terms of their US profile.
Yeah.
I looked at their Wikipedia, which I like to do often, and I think they had a couple of just about top 40 albums in the States, but they both went gold. So, again, there's often nuances to this of bands you don't think sold a lot actually sold more than you think.
Yeah. Okay.
But the other thing I got, so actually I went to Spotify as well about this, because they have been talking recently more about artists' payouts. We talked about Kate Nash, didn't we, a few months ago? Mm-hmm. And Spotify put out a figure of how much they paid out. And they actually shared their payouts last year for both Bonnie Tyler and Mazzy Star.
Oh, really? What you emailed?
Yeah.
What you asked them? Can you tell me how much these artists have made from your streaming service? And they said, "Yeah, we don't mind."
Well, they are doing that more now. And to be clear, they're not telling me how much the artists earn. Not giving away any secret kind of figures for them. It's just payouts, and I could calculate it if I went in and really crunched the data and said how many streams, what's the average payment. But they so basically, Spotify paid out $1.3 million for Bonnie Tyler's music last year.
Wow.
And $1.8 million for Mazzy Star. And that is, again, the huge caveat, that is payments to their rights holders, to the labels, publishers. And we don't know how much they got. But that's it seems to me, because I think that's the sign. Like Mazzy Star, for example, they have, as Simon said, they have 12.8 million monthly listeners on Spotify.
Yeah.
And that equals payouts of $1.8 million a year. And as I was saying earlier, that's quite stable. Like everyone's not going to stop listening to Mazzy Star suddenly next year. So for a band like that, it's that last year. It won't be so different this year. It carries on, and it's kind of a sort of a predictable income, I guess you'd say.
I guess so. So I guess the change here, and this is sort of not the point that Simon was exactly making, but the conclusion from this is that streaming has, if it's not done anything else, it has helped prolong an artist's ability to make money. I mean, if nothing. If nothing else, that's they've made music, they've made their music still available, because you go back to the physical era, and unless you were a very top artist, your records would have vanished from the shops within 6 months. Your latest album, you wouldn't find it anywhere. Whereas these days, obviously, all the music's still available on streaming platforms, which means you are still in the game. I mean, I guess some of the big artists, their records are would always have been in WH Smith and your major high street chains like I don't know, Virgin or HMV or something.
Very few.
But if you were a Mazzy Star, there'd be one copy of your album in HMV, wouldn't there, for a while, and sometimes that wouldn't be restocked. And then we also have to take into account, I mean, obviously albums were from time to time reissued, but I remember when, and this goes back to around the 90s, noughties, when a lot of record labels started repackaging albums by bands who'd been successful maybe 5 to 10 years earlier, and they came out at mid-price. So you do a range of mid-price reissues, but obviously every record that was mid-price, for any artist who found their album had been mid-priced, they would also find their royalties had been mid-priced as well. I remember one musician saying, they've just reissued my album without telling me, put it in the mid-price range, and so I earned less from it. And no one had consulted him about it. But yes, it does. It has prolonged the life of a band like Mazzy Star, whose records wouldn't necessarily be in the record shops now. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I was looking at their biggest song is Fade Into You. It's got 913 million streams on Spotify alone. And something has happened there because it's a long way ahead of their other songs. And that's the other thing. I think, like you say, you're there. And you can. So we've talked, haven't we, recently about Radiohead's Let Down becoming a hit because of TikTok. We talked about, what was the other one recently? It's Connie Francis, wasn't it? Her 1960s hit became big because of TikTok. So when you're on streaming, you can benefit from these things now where suddenly everyone on TikTok decides your song is great to soundtrack videos with, and you suddenly get loads of streams and money. And the other thing I think is that I think you get that people can discover anything now. Like I think when I was young, God, I'm turning into that guy, aren't I? When I was young, but like the barrier was having to buy records, buy CDs. I couldn't just go and listen to anything I wanted because I've seen a recommendation. Whereas now, young people can discover Mazzy Star because an artist they like has mentioned them as an influence, or because they're put into a playlist by the algorithm. I was listening this morning actually. St. Etienne have got it's their final album. I think it's just come out, hasn't it?
Yes.
And they've got a collaboration with Confidence Man on there, who are obviously really popular at the moment. They're kind of surging. And now people who love Confidence Man are going to discover St. Etienne.
Yeah.
Through that. And now St. Etienne's catalogue could get a bump from that. So that when you're on streaming, all these things can suddenly happen. Or you can have the Sophie Ellis-Bextor thing where a sync, or the Kate Bush thing where a sync in a TV show or film. So like you say, I think all of this, it could happen in the past in different ways. Like you could have a song in a film and it would be on the soundtrack and you might reissue it as a result. But now, yeah. So you can have your catalogue. It can be discovered by people for the first time who weren't born when you made the album, and you can benefit from all these different. So yeah, it's weird because I think this is something that came into my head really strongly when I was covering the UK's big streaming inquiry. A lot of the noise has been streaming services don't pay out enough. They're making loads of money from themselves and not paying out enough, and there is still arguments about that. And you can argue about how much money companies pay themselves in dividends and so on. But often what an artist takes home, it comes down to the deals. It comes down to the rights sales. And that's where, Beggars Group is a good example of a label that talked years ago about how it's put everyone onto a modern royalty rate and it's wiped its unrecouped balances. A lot of labels are doing that now. The majors are starting to do things where they pay royalties even if you're unrecouped. This stuff is all improving. So I think, again, maybe next year, the outlook for an artist from the 70s or 80s or 90s will be better than it was 5 years ago because of some of these changes. So it's changing all the time. But yeah, we should boil it down. I think Simon is correct. Like there are artists who are doing better from streaming. Doesn't invalidate the complaints. It doesn't invalidate some of the criticism of streaming. But yeah, nobody really talks about doing well is the other thing that people, there's something I think that companies like Spotify get frustrated by, is that artists who are doing better from streaming than they were from sales don't tend to talk about it. Artists who are across because they feel like they've lost income talk about it loudly. And all those views are valid, but we don't tend to hear as much from the artists who are doing well, I guess.
So Simon, in conclusion then, Simon's basically right in some circumstances, but not, but the figures are possibly not the ones that were originally put forward. You'd have to dig into the figures, and it presumes, as you say, certain royalty rates and stuff. So the figures might not be right, but Simon, in some cases, you're right. This is heritage artists who these days have a position where a loyal fan base or people listen to their music, or they are attracting in some way new listeners to their streaming sites, where in the past they wouldn't have been able to buy the record.
That's it. I think both my sources suggested that Simon's figures, although they questioned them in terms of these things, they were saying both their kind of best case scenario And I guess the good news, because I am an incorrigible optimist, the good news is that these best case scenarios are true for more artists now because labels are renegotiating those old deals and because the money is getting paid through more often. So I think things are improving, even if artists aren't quite reaching the level that his figures suggested.
Yeah. Good question, though.
It's a good question, wasn't it?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Simon, for that. Do you have any other questions for us? If you do, the email address is coming up. If you have any comments or queries or anything you'd like us to explain, drop us a line. I'll give you the address in just a second. But we're out of time for this week. Thank you, as always. Thank you very much for listening. If you are enjoying what we're trying to do here, please do spread the word, tell your friends, or leave us a review online if you get a chance, because that really helps to put us in front of new audiences. Alternatively, you can support us via Patreon. In fact, if you sign up to be a super fan, you get an extra 15 minutes or so of me and him chatting about music and money in a fairly free form kind of way. I think it's fair to say. This week that will include what am I making notes of? Best songs of or top rating songs of the summer, and also Stuart's beef with Radiohead. If you like the sound of any of that, do join us. You can become a super fan of the show at patreon.com/the price of music. And as I say, if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can use our socials, or do send us an email. Anything you don't understand about how the industry works that you think we might be able to untangle for you, any guidance or advice from the professionals, come to the price of music podcast at gmail.com. That's the price of music podcast at gmail.com. Till next time, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.